He was just a poor shoe salesman in Chicago, pockets full of money but a heart running on empty. What Dwight Lyman Moody discovered at 19 would change not only his life, but the lives of millions around the world. Stay till the end, because his life story will inspire you. Born into poverty in Northfield, Massachusetts, young Dwight knew hardship from his earliest days. When his father died suddenly, leaving behind a crushing load of debt, 5-year-old Dwight watched creditors strip their home bare, taking everything down to the kindling wood. His mother, Betsy, a woman of remarkable strength and simple faith, held the family together through sheer willpower, but there was little room for formal education or childhood luxuries. Dwight learned to work before he learned to read properly, and his rough manners and poor grammar would mark him for life. At 17, hungry for opportunity and tired of the limitations of rural life, Moody convinced his mother to let him seek his fortune in Boston. His uncle Samuel Holton reluctantly gave him work in his shoe store, but with strict conditions. The boy must attend church regularly and live a respectable life. It was in the Mount Vernon Congregational Church that Moody first encountered the patient ministry of Edward Kimball, a Sunday school teacher who saw potential in the crude, energetic young man that others might dismiss. The transformation came quietly one April morning in 1855, when Kimball found Moody in the back of the shoe store wrapping shoes for customers. With gentle words about Christ's love, the teacher led the young man to faith, though Moody himself later admitted he wasn't entirely sure what had happened to him that day. What was certain was that something had awakened in his soul, a restless energy that would soon find its outlet in service to others. When business opportunities called him to Chicago in 1856, Moody brought with him this newfound faith and an irrepressible desire to do something meaningful with it. Chicago was a city exploding with growth, filled with immigrants, workers, and wanderers, many of them far from home and family. Moody, still selling shoes but growing increasingly uncomfortable with a life focused solely on profit, began visiting the slums and tenements, talking to anyone who would listen about the hope he had found. His first venture into ministry was as humble as his background, renting 4 pews in Plymouth Church and scouring the streets to fill them with ragamuffin children and rough adults who would never darken the door of a respectable church on their own. His methods were unorthodox and his theology simple, but his sincerity was unmistakable. When the established church grew uncomfortable with his unconventional congregation, Moody simply found an abandoned saloon and started his own mission Sunday school. The work consumed him. By day, he sold shoes with mounting success, but his evenings and weekends belonged to the growing crowd of society's outcasts who gathered to hear his plain-spoken messages about God's love. His grammar remained poor and his preaching style rough around the edges, but something in his earnest delivery and obvious care for his listeners transcended his limitations. The mission grew from a handful of street children to hundreds of families who found in Moody not just a preacher, but a friend who genuinely cared about their struggles. The Civil War years tested both his ministry and his character. While other young men marched off to battle, Moody felt called to serve in a different way, working with the United States Christian Commission to bring comfort and spiritual care to soldiers. He spent months in army camps, distributing supplies, writing letters for illiterate soldiers, and holding informal worship services wherever he could gather a crowd. The experience broadened his vision and deepened his understanding of human suffering, while his natural ability to connect with people from all walks of life became increasingly apparent. When he returned to Chicago, Moody made a decision that shocked his friends and family. He abandoned his lucrative shoe business to devote himself entirely to Christian work. The man who had come to the city dreaming of wealth now lived on faith and donations, pouring himself into building what would become one of America's most influential independent churches. His Illinois Street Church attracted a diverse congregation that reflected the democratic spirit of his ministry. Businessmen sat beside laborers, immigrants worshiped alongside established Americans, and social barriers dissolved in the warmth of genuine Christian fellowship. But it was his partnership with Ira Sankey that would transform Moody from a local Chicago preacher into an international phenomenon. When the two men met at a YMCA convention in 1870, something clicked immediately. Sankey's rich baritone voice and gift for leading congregational singing perfectly complemented Moody's direct, conversational preaching style. Together, They developed a form of popular evangelism that was both deeply spiritual and thoroughly American, accessible, emotional, and focused on the individual's personal relationship with God. Their breakthrough came during their first trip to Britain in 1873. What began as a modest speaking tour exploded into something unprecedented in the history of Christian evangelism. In city after city, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Belfast, London, crowds gathered in numbers that strained the largest venues available. Moody's simple, story-filled sermons, delivered in his distinctly American style, captivated audiences hungry for a message of hope and redemption that transcended denominational boundaries and social classes. The London campaign of 1875 established Moody as the most famous preacher of his generation. For months, he drew crowds that numbered in the tens of thousands, while newspaper reporters struggled to explain the phenomenon of this poorly educated American who could move sophisticated British audiences to tears and decisions. His secret lay not in theological brilliance or oratorical polish, but in his transparent sincerity and his ability to present the gospel in terms that ordinary people could understand and embrace. When Moody and Sankey returned to America, they found a nation eager to hear their message. The post-Civil War period was a time of rapid industrialization and social change, leaving many Americans feeling spiritually adrift. City after city opened its doors to the evangelistic team, and their campaigns became major civic events that drew participants across denominational and social lines. In Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, and Boston, they filled the largest auditoriums and temporary structures built specifically for their meetings. Yet for all his public success, Moody remained deeply aware of his limitations and hungry for continued growth. He established schools, first the Northfield Seminary for young women, then the Mount Hermon School for boys, because he believed education was essential for Christian service. These institutions reflected his democratic ideals. They welcomed students regardless of their ability to pay, and their curriculum combined practical skills with spiritual formation. His vision extended beyond individual conversions to systematic Christian education and training. The Moody Bible Institute, founded in 1886, became his most enduring legacy, a school designed to train ordinary men and women for extraordinary service. Unlike traditional seminaries that required extensive classical education, the Institute welcomed students from all backgrounds and focused on practical Bible study, evangelistic methods, and Christian living. Throughout his career, Moody faced criticism from various quarters. Intellectual Christians questioned his lack of formal theological training, while conservative denominations worried about his willingness to work across denominational boundaries. Social gospel advocates criticized his focus on individual salvation rather than systemic reform. Yet Moody remained remarkably unbothered by such attacks, confident that his calling was to preach the simple gospel message in language that ordinary people could understand and accept. His personal life reflected the same simplicity and sincerity that marked his public ministry. His marriage to Emma Revell provided him with a stable foundation and wise counsel, while his 3 children grew up understanding that their home belonged as much to the stream of visitors and workers who constantly filled it as it did to the family. Money flowed through his hands to various ministries and charitable causes, though he lived simply and never accumulated personal wealth. The demands of constant travel and preaching eventually took their toll on his health. During what would be his final campaign in Kansas City in 1899, Moody collapsed from exhaustion and heart problems. As he lay dying at his beloved Northfield home, surrounded by family and the educational institutions he had founded, he faced death with the same confidence that had marked his life, declaring that he saw heaven opening before him. His funeral drew thousands of mourners from around the world, but his real memorial lay in the countless lives he had touched and the institutions he had built. Students from his schools carried his methods and message to every continent, while the churches he had helped establish continued to grow and multiply. More than any single theological innovation or organizational achievement, Moody had demonstrated that the ancient gospel could speak with fresh power to modern audiences when delivered by someone who genuinely loved both God and people. The poor farm boy who had barely learned to read became the man who taught millions to find hope in the pages of Scripture, proving that God's calling is not limited by human credentials, but is fulfilled through human faithfulness and love.